Wyoming Territory, January 1881. The wind screamed across the high plains like it was hunting something, and maybe it was. The full moon hung cold and bright above the snow-covered grasslands, lighting the path of the lone stagecoach that rattled to a stop outside a weather-worn ranch house tucked at the edge of the Bighorn foothills. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped down. Her name was Rosalie Rourke, 22 years old, and she was shivering so hard her teeth clicked. Her boots were soaked from melted snow, her gloves thin and useless, and her coat second-hand wool did not stand a chance against the Wyoming cold. The driver tipped his hat, tossed her single trunk onto the ground, and was gone before she could speak. She stood there alone in the dark, wind slicing through her like a blade. Then the door to the ranch house opened. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a wool shirt, suspenders, and a rifle slung lazy over one arm. His hair was dark, a little too long, and his eyes were the color of burnt amber. He looked at her with a mix of surprise and something quiet or something tired, but kind. "You Rosalie?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes. Rosalie Rourke. I came from St. Louis. I answered your letter." The man stepped outside, boots crunching over snow. He shrugged off the thick blanket wrapped around his shoulders and draped it over hers before she could object. "Stay," he said simply. His voice was low, steady like a man who did not waste words. She blinked up at him, startled. The warmth of the blanket sank into her shoulders, and her breath caught in her chest. No one had touched her so gently in years. "I'm Warren Vale," he added. "I sent for you." The name struck her. It was real now. All the letters they had exchanged, folded and read late into the night, had led to this moment. She had memorized his handwriting, had imagined his voice. And now here he was, real and solid and standing in front of her in the freezing dark. "I thought you would arrive in the morning," he said, glancing down at her trunk. "You must be frozen." "I am," she admitted. Her voice shook partly from cold, partly from nerves. Warren picked up her trunk with one hand and gestured her toward the house. "Come in." The inside of the house was simple but clean. A fire burned in the hearth, throwing orange light over the wooden floor. A kettle hissed on the stove. There was a table, a rocking chair, a worn leather-bound Bible on the shelf. Home. Rosalie stood awkward near the fireplace, hands out, trying to thaw her fingers. Warren set her trunk near the wall and poured a tin cup of coffee, then handed it to her. "I was not sure you would come," he said. Rosalie took the cup, grateful for the heat. "I was not sure either. But I could not stay in St. Louis. There was nothing left for me." She did not say more, and Warren did not press. He only nodded and tossed another log onto the fire. "You must be hungry," he said. "I am, but I can cook in the morning. I can earn my place here." Warren looked at her for a long moment. "You do not need to earn anything. I asked you to come. I meant it." His words were simple, but they landed heavy in her chest. She had not been wanted in a long time. Not since her father drank himself into debt, and her uncle tried to marry her off to a man twice her age. Not since she packed what little she had and mailed that first letter, heart in her throat. Warren pulled a thick quilt from the back of the rocker and handed it to her. "You can take the bed tonight. I will sleep out here." "No, I have lived alone a long time, Rosalie. I know how to make do." She studied him in the firelight. He moved with the quiet steadiness of a man who had carried more than his share, but not once had he looked at her with disappointment or regret. Only that same even, steady gaze. She swallowed. "Thank you for the blanket." He looked at her again, and something passed between them, something unspoken. "Stay," he repeated, softer this time. She nodded. That night Rosalie curled up in the bed with the quilt wrapped tight and Warren's blankets still over her shoulders. The house creaked in the wind, and the fire crackled low in the other room. She could hear him settling into the rocker, boots thunking quietly on the floorboards. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she did not feel afraid. In the morning, snow fell soft and slow across the land. Warren was already outside feeding the stock. She watched him from the window, his strong back, his sure hands. He moved like the land itself had shaped him, and in a way, it probably had. She found a pan, boiled water, and cooked oats with the little sack of sugar she had packed from home. When he came back inside, his cheeks red from the cold, she handed him a bowl. "You did not have to," he said. "I wanted to." He nodded, took the bowl, and sat across from her. They ate quietly, but the silence was easy now. "I have a small herd," Warren said after a while. "A few head of cattle, some chickens. The land is good here, if you know how to live with it." "I would like to learn," she said. He looked at her, long and steady. "You are not what I expected." She smiled faintly. "That makes two of us." The days passed, cold and slow. Rosalie helped with chores, mended shirts, learned how to saddle a horse with hands that fumbled but grew steadier each time. Warren taught her how to split wood, how to watch the sky for signs of weather. He was patient, always. Never raised his voice. Never looked at her like she was a burden. One evening, after supper, she found him outside by the corral, staring out across the snow-covered fields. "I never asked," she said quietly. "Why did you send for a wife?" Warren leaned against the fence. "I was tired of being alone," he said. "I do not expect much. Just someone to walk beside." Her voice was soft. "That is all I ever wanted too." He turned then, really looked at her, and something deep in his expression shifted. Not surprise, not hesitation, just quiet recognition. "Rosalie," he said, and her name sounded different on his lips. Like it belonged to him now. She stepped closer, heart pounding, but she did not look away. Warren touched her hand. Just that. A brush of rough fingers against hers. But it was enough. She did not pull away. And in the silence that followed, the wind eased, the cold softened, and something new settled between them. Not just survival. Not duty. Hope. Real and warm and waiting to grow. The third morning after her arrival, Rosalie left the warmth of the house before dawn. The frost stung her cheeks, but she welcomed the sharpness of it. The sky had just begun to pale behind the hills, and the corral fence was rimmed in silver. Warren stood beside the barn, brushing down a roan gelding. He didn't notice her right away, and she watched the way he worked, methodical, unhurried. When he finally glanced up, his eyes held none of the guarded stillness they had when they first met. "You're up early," he said, offering her the brush without hesitation. She took it. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "There was a noise on the roof. Might have been ice breaking loose." He nodded. "Could be." Last storm laid it on heavy. They worked in silence for a while, breath clouding the air. The gelding shifted but didn't shy from her hand. "I've never touched a horse before," she said after a moment. "You've got a steady hand," he replied. "That's what matters." She glanced at him. "You trust easily." "No," he said, not unkindly. "But I trust what I see." Later, he showed her how to mix mash for the chickens, how to tell when the water and the troughs might freeze again. She listened closely, not because she feared failure, but because he never talked to her like she was expected to already know. Just that she could. That evening, while Rosalie laid out sliced cold pork and the last of the preserved beets, Warren pulled a tin box from the cupboard. He set it carefully on the table beside her plate. She raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Letters," he said. "From my sister, mostly. She writes from Kansas City. Thought you might want something to read while I'm out mending the fence line tomorrow." She opened the lid and lifted a neatly folded sheet. The handwriting was tight and tidy, full of questions about weather and health, and a mention of schooling fees for a niece named Esther. There were pressed flowers tucked between some pages, long faded but still holding shape. "I didn't know you had family." He wiped his hands on a rag. Just her. Haven't seen her in 6 years. She's raising 2 girls on her own. Her husband drowned in the river hauling freight. Rosalie placed the letter back into the box. She writes like she misses this place. She misses how quiet it is, he said. But not the work. Rosalie looked at him, then back at the box. I could write her, if you'd like. Let her know I arrived safe. Warren's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes softened. She'd like that. The next morning brought sun, rare and welcome. Rosalie took a tin basin to the back stoop and knelt to scrub laundry. Her hands stung in the cold water, but she didn't mind. The rhythm of it steadied her. A shadow crossed the snow beside her. She looked up to find Warren holding a folded oilcloth. You'll freeze washing out here, he said. I'm nearly done. He crouched beside her and dipped his hands in without a word, wringing out one of the shirts. She blinked at him. You don't have to, you're not the only one with hands, he said simply. They worked side by side, and when the last shirt was hung stiff on the line, he handed her a mug of hot broth. I boiled it with marrow, he said. Helps when the wind's got teeth. She sipped, and warmth bloomed in her chest. Did you ever think you'd marry? She asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then he leaned against the porch rail, watching the hills in the distance. Not until last spring, he said. I buried a neighbor's wife. Took me all day to dig the ground hard as iron. He'd lost her to childbirth. Buried her behind the barn because the road was too frozen to carry her to town. She held the mug tighter. I stood there with the shovel, he said, and I thought no one should go through that alone. And no one should have to be the only one left. Rosalie stepped closer. I'm not afraid of work, she said. I know. I'm not afraid of hard winters, or of being far from town, or of things being strange between us at first. His eyes met hers, steady and warm. What are you afraid of? She let the question settle, then answered honestly. Of being treated like something fragile. Of being looked at and not seen. Warren nodded slowly. You've got more spine than most men I know. I see that clear. She looked down, her breath catching. I don't need promises. I don't give them, he said. But I keep what's mine. He reached out then, slow and sure, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His knuckles brushed her cheek. The wind rattled the eaves, but neither moved. I'll bring in more wood, he said finally, voice rougher than before. She watched him go, heart thudding. Behind her, the shirts flapped on the line like pale flags, catching sunlight that finally felt like it might linger. By late February, the snow began to pull back from the edges of the fields, revealing patches of yellowed grass and frozen mud. The wind still had bite, but it no longer carried the deep sting of midwinter. Rosalie had grown used to the rhythm of the land, how the animals moved when the sun rose, how the stove needed coaxing on colder mornings, how Warren's voice turned quieter when dusk settled in. That morning she found him in the shed behind the barn, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sharpening the teeth on a long saw with a whetstone. The rasping sound filled the air, steady and precise. I didn't know you had timber to cut, she said, stepping into the doorway. He didn't pause his work. Come spring, I plan to add to the barn. The roof's too low to keep the heat from slipping out. I'll need dry boards ready by April. She leaned against the frame, fingers tucked into her shawl. My father built carriages. I used to watch him measure the spokes. He said too much force in the wrong place split the whole thing. Warren looked up, the corner of his mouth barely lifting. You've got an eye for detail, then. I used to. Before I had to stop watching. The whetstone stilled. Why'd you stop? She hesitated. He died owing more than he owned. The man who came to settle the debt didn't care about carriage parts or unfinished wood. He cared about what he could sell. I stopped looking because it hurt too much to see what was being taken. Warren set the saw aside, wiping his hands on a scrap of canvas. You ever think about building something again? She stepped deeper into the shed. I don't know. I got used to leaving things behind. I think maybe you're meant to make things, he said, not just survive them. She met his eyes, and something inside her shifted. You think I could help with the barn? If you're willing to learn. He paused. I'd trust you with the measurements. Later that day, she sat at the kitchen table with a scrap of paper and a charcoal stub, sketching out dimensions based on Warren's notes. He watched her from the stove, brow furrowed slightly. You always draw like that? He asked. Like what? Like you already know how it'll look when it's done. She didn't answer at first. Then she said, I think I need to see the end of something before I can begin it. He nodded. That's a rare kind of seeing. They spent the next week hauling cut logs to the lean-to beside the barn. Rosalie learned the weight of green wood and how to wedge a splintered handhold into place with her boot. Warren worked beside her without comment, though now and then he handed her a tin of lard to rub into her palms when they blistered. One afternoon, as shadows stretched long across the field, he led her to the top of the hill behind the house. The wind had softened to a breeze, and the sun dipped low, casting the land in gold. I come here most evenings, he said. Helps me think. She stood beside him, arms crossed against the chill. About what? Things I've done wrong. Things I still need to fix. She glanced at him. Is that what you see when you look out there? He was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. Other times I just see how far the land goes. Rosalie let the silence settle between them, the kind that didn't feel like waiting. I used to dream of far-off cities, she said. Places with lamps in every window and dresses made of silk. I thought if I could get to one of them, I'd be safe. And now? I think safety might be quieter than I thought. Maybe it's just someone handing you a brush without asking if you know how to use it. Warren's gaze held hers, unwavering. I meant it when I said stay. I know, she said. That's why I did. The wind tugged at her skirt, and she stepped closer, not touching him, but near enough to feel the heat from his coat. Would you have sent another letter if I hadn't come? She asked. He shook his head. I'd have waited until spring. Then gone to town, seen what was needed. But I wouldn't have asked again. Because you didn't want to be disappointed? Because I don't ask twice when I mean something the first time. She looked down at the snow's softened ground. I wasn't sure what I'd find here. He tilted his head. And now? She lifted her eyes. Now I'm starting to believe in things I didn't before. He reached for her hand, then not sudden, not unsure, and she let him take it. His grip was warm, calloused, steady. They stood that way until the sun dipped behind the hills, casting the land in a soft blue hush. Neither spoke again before heading down the slope, but their hands stayed linked, and Rosalie didn't let go. The first calf came early, a week before the thaw broke proper. The heifer had gone into labor sometime in the night, and by the time Warren spotted her limping near the fence line at dawn, her breath was already coming hard and fast. He called for Rosalie without raising his voice, and she came running, skirt bunched in one hand, boots half-laced. She didn't ask what to do. She just followed him into the pen, knelt beside the heifer in the snow, and waited for instruction. Keep her calm, Warren said, wrapping a rope around the swollen belly and testing the tension. If she jolts, we'll lose the calf. The heifer let out a low bawl. Rosalie lay a hand along her neck, whispering low, steady tones Warren couldn't quite make out. Her voice didn't waver, not even when blood hit the snow. It took nearly 2 hours. When the calf finally slid free, trembled once, and let out a thin, wet cry, Rosalie let out a breath so deep it sounded like something breaking loose inside her. Warren wiped his hands on a rag, then offered it to her. You kept your head. I was shaking the whole time, you just couldn't see it. He crouched to check the calf's legs, then glanced over. You didn't run. I don't run from things that matter. Neither spoke after that, but when they hauled the calf toward shelter, Warren walked close enough that their shoulders brushed now and then. That evening, Rosalie lit the lanterns before the light faded. She didn't wait for Warren to come in from the barn. She knew he would, soon as he checked the fencing again. Instead, she sat at the table with a small pile of torn muslin and began stitching narrow lengths of cloth into strips. When he stepped in, snow clinging to his collar, he paused at the sight. "What's that for?" he asked. "Bandages," she said. "In case another birth goes wrong. Or someone gets trampled. Seems foolish not to have them ready." He hung his coat. "Most folks just tear what they need when they need it. I'd rather be ready." He looked at her for a beat longer than he needed to, then sat across from her and pulled off his gloves. "You always plan for trouble?" "I don't plan for it," she said. "But I don't pretend it won't come." He nodded once, slowly. "That's wise." They worked in silence after that, her with the needle, him oiling his saddle straps. When the fire burned low, he rose and added another log without a word. "Did you ever want children?" she asked. His hands stilled over the leather. "I used to think about it more. Before the war, maybe." She didn't press. She went back to stitching, her hands sure now, even in the dim light. "I would have liked a boy," he said eventually. "Someone to teach the land to. But a girl too. Long as her feet were steady." Rosalie met his eyes. "I think children grow steadier when the ground beneath them doesn't shift." "You think you'll want one?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "If the life we build can hold them, yes." He leaned back in his chair, watching the flame flicker in the lantern glass. "I never imagined I'd be speaking of such things with someone I hadn't known a full season," he said. "I never imagined I'd want to," she answered. The next day brought sleet, and the wind carried an edge that caught in the bones. Rosalie spent the afternoon inside, scrubbing the floorboards with lye and ash water until her arms ached. She didn't say why, just started, and didn't stop until the wood shone pale and clean. Warren came in at dusk, boots soaked, and stood watching her wring out the rag. "You trying to erase someone?" he asked. She looked up, face flushed from the work. "No. Just wanted the place to feel more like mine." He nodded once and crossed the room, drawing a small parcel from his pocket. "What's that?" she asked. He set it on the table. "From town. Traded a pelt for it." She unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a comb, bone-handled, carved with a simple pattern of wheat stalks. She held it carefully, running her thumb along the teeth. "You thought of me," she said. "I've been thinking of you every day since you stepped off that coach." Her throat tightened. "You never say things you don't mean." "No. And I mean this." Their eyes met, quiet and full. She stepped closer, cradling the comb in her hand. "Then I'll keep it near. Like I'll keep you." He reached for her then, not cautious, not uncertain, but with the steadiness he carried into every task. His hand found the curve of her waist, and hers rose to his shoulder. They stood close, breath mingling. In that stillness, nothing felt fragile. Not her. Not him. Not what they were building between them. By mid-March, the land began to stir. The creek behind the barn, long silenced by ice, ran again in thin, gurgling threads, and the gray light of winter softened into something gentler. Warren built a gate for the south pasture while Rosalie took inventory of what food stores remained. They spoke less during the day, not from distance, but from the quiet understanding that work came first while daylight held. One morning, Rosalie found 2 eggs nestled beneath the hay in the chicken coop. She brought them in, set them carefully in a bowl, and stood staring at them for a long moment before calling out toward the barn. Warren came in, brushing sawdust from his sleeves, and she held out the bowl like it was something precious. "We're down to the last of the flour," she said. "But if I stretch it, I can make biscuits with these." He looked at the eggs, then at her. "Then I'll stretch the fence posts to match." She smiled, but there was thought behind her eyes. "There's enough sugar left for one more batch of preserves. I've been saving it." "For something special?" he asked. She set the bowl down. "I was waiting until I knew it'd be eaten by someone who'd taste it." He crossed the room, resting a hand on the edge of the counter. You think I don't? I think you notice things, she said. But I don't know if you've ever let yourself enjoy them. He looked at her long enough that she felt it in her chest. You make it easier. That night they ate the biscuits hot from the hearth, steam curling from their centers as the last of the honey dripped down their fingers. No one spoke until the plates were empty and the fire burned low. Warren leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking, he said, about the spring drive. I usually help the McCallans move their cattle east, but this year, I might stay back. Rosalie folded the cloth napkin in her lap. Why? His gaze didn't drift. Because there's something here now worth tending. Her throat tightened. You mean me? I mean us. What we're making. She rose slowly, crossed to where he sat, and stood before him with her hands at her sides. You want to build something permanent? I already am, he said. But I can't keep calling you my wife if you're not truly mine. Rosalie met his eyes. I didn't come here expecting a preacher. I didn't expect to want one. He stood close enough now that she could hear the soft rasp of his breath. But I want the truth of it. Not just the paper I sent or the name you took. She reached for his hand, fingers curling into his. Then we'll ride into town when the road's clear. He gave a short nod. You can wear that blue dress. The one you stitched the hem on last week. Her smile deepened. You noticed? I notice everything about you. The wedding was quiet. They rode into Buffalo on a clear morning in April, when the hills were still patchy with snow and the roads ran thick with spring melt. The preacher's wife laid out a clean cloth and brought out a family Bible. Warren stood tall in a brushed coat, Rosalie radiant in her blue dress with her hair braided back, a sprig of juniper tucked behind one ear. They exchanged vows with hands clasped, eyes steady. No one cried, but Rosalie's voice caught when she said, yes, and Warren's thumb brushed the back of her hand like he'd been waiting his whole life to hear it. Afterward, they shared coffee with the McCallans, who loaned them a wagon to carry supplies back to the ranch. They brought flour, a bolt of muslin, seeds for the garden, and a copper kettle that Rosalie picked out without asking his opinion. Back home, Warren built her a table that fit beneath the south window, where the light fell warm in the morning. She planted herbs in clay pots along the sill, and when the bees came in June, she traded eggs for combs of honey at the edge of the valley. They slept close each night, her head on his chest, his hand tracing slow circles across her back. They spoke of adding on to the house, maybe westward toward the cottonwoods. She said she wanted a room with shelves for books, and he said he'd build them himself. One morning, as she stood at the basin rinsing blueberries from the bush behind the barn, she turned to find Warren watching her from the doorway, arms crossed. You're staring, she said, brushing hair from her cheek. I'm memorizing, he said. In case the years blur it. She set the berries aside. You don't need to remember this moment. No? No. You'll be living it. That summer, they built the new wing together, he with the saw and square, she with the measurements and lines chalked onto board. She read aloud in the evenings from the books they brought back from town, her voice low and steady as he whittled or mended gear by the fire. On the first frost of October, Rosalie stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around her belly, and told him they'd be 3 by next spring. Warren didn't speak at first. He only stepped forward, wrapped her in his arms, and held her for a long time with his face tucked against her hair. They named the child Samuel, after Warren's grandfather. He was born in late May, under a full moon, with Rosalie gripping Warren's hand and refusing to cry out. When he came, red-faced and furious, Warren wrapped him in a linen cloth and held him like he never held anything so precious. Years passed. They added a second barn, a smokehouse, and a school slate to hang on the wall. Samuel grew tall and stubborn, like his father, but with his mother's keen eyes. On warm evenings they sat on the porch and watched the sun slip behind the hills, her hand always finding his. They never spoke of the time before, not because it hurt, but because what they'd built together had grown so full, so rooted, there was no room for anything else. And in every season, In every quiet moment between chores and laughter, Rosalie knew she'd done more than survive. She'd chosen a life. And been chosen in return.